Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Oldphan and Lawrence. We're doing a little bit of an encore recording. We just did an interview with Lawrence, and some of the topics in that interview I wanted to hash out a little bit more, some more. So thanks for coming on the channel, guys.
No worries.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So the first topic that I wanted to talk about was, Lawrence, you talked about having ways of advocating for antinatalism in the public image and how we portray ourselves.
Yeah.
And if I could summarize, I believe you were trying to say we should have a little bit more of a professional look, more like a. I guess that sums it up, right? Like a more polished look instead of looking a little bit like I don't know, the typical street activist that you would see in, say, the vegan movement, or I don't know, even maybe like the Extinction Rebellion sometimes, the more extreme versions. So instead of meeting that extreme version, a more professional outlook. Does that sum up what you said in the podcast?
It sums up what I said, but I worded it badly. So I somewhat didn't mean that, but
okay.
But I can elaborate later. But
okay, so yeah, let's just hold that thought. Because I'd like to hear Amanda's point of view on this, because she's been advocating this for, we keep saying 10 years, but I feel like we're getting on 11 years now. Are we not? So 11 years, and your artwork, I don't know if this is like an official category, but you've categorized it as cringe art, right? And you're giving off a different outlook with a lot of humor, a lot of cringe art, and so this is like a different image. And I was curious about what your thoughts on public image is, and how you can advocate for this particular movement going forward. What are your thoughts, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I just want to say, just for the sake of transparency, that I am dealing with an insane puppy at the minute. So there may be barking, there may be shenanigans, there may be some drama and comedy, and what a way to preface my answer to this question, right? So I think a multitude of different approaches to antinatalist activism is extremely important, because there's lots of different types of people. And so I don't think that one. I think this is a very controversial subject in the antinatalist community. You know, often people want it sort of one way. They want it sort of always very sort of manicured, always sort of just sort of straight-laced, only sticking to the most logical of arguments, and sort of nothing in between, nothing that anybody could find a little dark, nothing that anybody could find a little weird. And I think that approach is absolutely of paramount importance. So it's not that I have any disagreement with people doing that, and I encourage more people to take that approach with it. But I think that there's a variety of reasons why it shouldn't be the only approach. One is, I think we're dealing with some extremely controversial ideas. And I think, is often the case, you can't necessarily get people to engage with extremely controversial ideas using that method. They're not looking for it to come from a serious person. They don't want to understand it in the first place. It turns them off right away. So it's less to do with the presentation of the person than the perceived poison of the subject matter. So I think that comedy and art, that's a big reason why comedy and art is so important. Those are such important tools in the antinatalist toolbox, because if you allow for a more comedic approach, a more to talk about these ideas in a way that people aren't necessarily expecting, it disarms the whole thing a little bit. It allows it in, and it allows it into a lot of minds that it would otherwise never go. I think it's a key towards bringing it to a much larger audience than just sort of an academic crowd, a crowd looking for maybe a specific type of person. So again, I think it needs to be a big medley of ideas, and I also think that especially at this stage of the game, being Antinatalism International, we don't necessarily know. I think it'd be a terrible thing to sort of put a foot on the neck of, what people are going to do with it around the world and what effect that's going to have, because we can't necessarily gauge that in any kind of realistic way at this point. I mean, I don't think that anybody could have anticipated the impact that Raphael Samuel had. Like, if you had shown the antinatalist community a blueprint for that before it happened, I don't think anybody would believe you. But there's no question that the reach of such a method, which is a bit more on the comedic side, it is a bit more on the entertainment spectrum of some sort, that got at least the word into people's heads, like nothing else has. Like no book, like no video, like nothing else. And so I think, I'm sorry I'm speaking so much, but I mean, it is sort of a pet subject of mine, that antinatalism, in addition to being this very, this perhaps a more academic antinatalist philosophical, in addition to that approach, it is also an art movement, and it is going to be interpreted in all these different ways, and that's sort of the way it should be. It should be this medley of approaches that all complement each other and allow people to maybe go from a comedic presentation of the subject to something more substantial. So long as all of that works together, then I don't see a problem with it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Amanda. Lawrence, you wanted to go ahead and clarify some points?
Yeah, well, I mean, it may surprise some, and it may surprise Amanda, but I 100% agree with everything she said. So I presume this will come out on Mark's YouTube channel before the podcast that we just recorded.
I'll actually release this after the podcast, like not beforehand.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So basically, if anyone wants to hear what I said before, go to the podcast. But basically, I essentially, in brief, said, as Mark said, I think that we need to come across as, like, I was using the term like presentable. And I understand when I said that, it probably came across as I meant sort of like clinical suit and tie, that sort of thing. Now, I will say that whilst I did not entirely mean that when I said it, I did have a bias in my head, because me, just as an individual, I mean, from people that like know me and stuff, they know that I like, a bit of banter, swear a lot, that sort of stuff. So it's not like I'm like the most professional of all people, but I do have a slight bias towards, I feel like, given it's such a fringe philosophy, and let's be honest, like statistically, no one subscribes to this. Like, we're such a small minority, it's insignificant, and the vast majority of people have never even met or heard of anyone that thinks this way. And so when I said that we need to come across as presentable, I meant that I think we need to make somewhat of an effort, and I think I still stand by this, but at the same time, I do appreciate completely what Amanda's saying, and I don't think anyone's freedom and prerogative to do activism in whatever the way they want should be hindered in any way. I do think we at least need to try and make a collective effort to at least enter the public discourse and not instantly be disregarded as a bunch of, like we don't want to hand it on a silver platter to people that they can just disregard us as a bunch of weirdos straight away. And I'm not saying that there are specific forms of activism that I can pinpoint at this point in time and say that's going to get us labeled as a weirdo, or that's going to get us labeled as a weirdo, because I don't know what will. Maybe because of the topic that we're dealing with, maybe whatever we do, we're just going to get labeled as weirdos, even if we have a suit and tie on, we've got the perfume on, or what's the other, cologne or whatever it is. I wear perfume, and what? But like we can do all these things, and maybe we're still going to come off and get labeled as some sort of death cult, whatever, and we just want people to stop, having sex. I don't know, whatever. So I do I do get that, but at the same time, I think there are steps we can take to at least mitigate that happening. So, like, maybe the best thing would not be to just go into a crowded room and shout procreation is murder with no other context. For example, now if someone wants to do that, they're absolutely free to do that. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna pull them aside and like grab their collar or whatever. And I have no right to anyway. It's not like I'm some sort of like person who controls stuff. But I think when we enter the mainstream discussion, we just need to bear in mind that since we've been talking in our isolated communities for so long, we've gotten used to maybe speaking in certain ways or putting things forward in certain ways, assuming the other person kind of is on the same level of us as us. On the Discord servers, on the YouTube channels, when we respond to each other's videos, on the Facebook groups, in real life, even if we've met each other in real life. But we need to remember that when we're going into the mainstream, like, everyone else is on a completely different page to us, and there's probably very little common ground. So that was more what I meant to say, is we just need to heed that, rather than, not everyone has to put on a tie and stuff like that.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. The restaurant thing reminds me of the direct action everywhere. It's not food, it's violence chants. A little bit of a story time. I've been an animal activist for 7 years, and I've done all of it. I've done the direct action everywhere stuff. I've done the a PETA-esque kind of demo. Actually, one person, when I first got involved, one organization that seems to get a lot of heat is PETA, right? And I had my own criticisms of PETA, particularly with pseudoscientific blogs that they produced about milk causing cancer or bone fractures. I forgot exactly what it was, or milk causes autism, something like that. And I was like, this is not helping our movement if we lack the scientific credibility. Because then, what about the nutritional advice that we give out? And anyways, one of the people that I first met, she said she got into it because of the nude protests. And then she started to do that herself, and she thought it was very shocking. It made her want to go home and research it. And the more she researched, she became more interested in veganism and became an activist because of it. And I think that's a positive thing. My counter to that was, what was the cost? So literally anything that you can do will attract. But how do you measure the people that you put off? And then she retorted with, I think people who criticize all the time should actually try the activism. So I was like, logically, I don't think that's true, but okay. So a couple of months later, I got naked, poured blood all over myself, and did a demo in my underwear. So it was an uncomfortable situation, but I wanted it under my belt. I wanted to know what it would felt like, if I actually felt like I was doing something productive. And I also did the fur campaigns and stuff like that. And what I noticed is that my main type of activism is I also gave talks on vegan ethics. The people that would do more shock demos weren't exactly coming to my my talks, and I felt like there was everybody had their own mode of activism. And I think it's kind of like a puzzle, and you have all these different pieces that make up the bigger picture. And I always wanted to do the philosophy. I always wanted to do the public speaking. I wanted to do the professional look, the stereotypical look of the effective altruist. And it was weird because I remember one of a fellow activists, she said, "Mark, I don't know why you need like a philosophical essay to just be vegan." This was someone who was studying this in university, and I understand it. Like, I understand the criticism of, particularly when it comes to academia and philosophy, it's a bit, it comes across as a little bit elitist. Oldphan, you reminded me of like this type of high art, low art kind of thing, when the message is technically the same, right? And for me, when I got involved in the antinatalism community, I thought, well, how am I going to contribute? And I thought about this with my vegan activism and my antinatalism activism. My heart is in the philosophy. And in some of the comments in, say, the podcast or my YouTube channel, it's been like a double-edged sword. Someone will say, I hate this, or I dislike this because it's too philosophical. And then another comment will say, I really like this, I love this because it's philosophical. And it's like, well, what niche are you filling? And I think that when it comes to the, and maybe I'm wrong on this, Oldphan, you have more experience with this over the years. I feel like the art side, the music side, has been, there's been a lot of activism there, and particularly with the YouTube content. Now, there's a problem with this because there's been a lot of YouTube, but there's also been a lot of takedowns of YouTube channels. So, the rhetoric is kind of different because, as you said, if you stay within your echo chamber, you start to use terminology. So in the vegan world, you're starting to use words like speciesism, carnism, anti-speciesism, or anthropocentric, whatever. What is it? I feel like there's other terms that's used in that world, but then also within the antinatalist world, we're talking about asymmetries, and we're talking about we're name dropping Cabrera or even, unfortunately, and I feel like this may come from the child-free movement, when people refer to children, what is it, as spawn, or like there's derogatory terms that they use, right? Is it sporg or spur? I don't.
Why am I blanking on
Me
this?
too. I'm blanking on this, but I feel like most people are going to understand. I think most people are going to understand what I'm talking about here.
Sprogs.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And referring to biological parents as breeders, and natalists, right? Like, you go to the general public and say, "Hey, do you believe in natalism?" Like, they're not going to figure that out, right? And then you go into the general public and say, "Hey, what do you think about speciesism?" They're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I think it's actually important that whenever you're involved in a community or a social justice community, so to speak, that you do step out of it, so you don't fall into the echo chamber and start speaking the jargon and the lingo, so you can connect with other people who have no idea what you're talking about, so that you can communicate a little bit more effectively. That's at least my take on it, because I noticed that my activism is a little bit, I feel like I can be a better activist when I get outside of these chambers just for a short bit. But again, from my perspective, since I've been in antinatalism, I feel like the professional side has been neglected. What do you think about that, Amanda?
Well, you said a lot there, so I hope I'm. Yeah, no. Not that that's a bad thing. But I think it's a difficult thing to develop where. It's a difficult thing to compare where antinatalism is as a movement right now with like where veganism is. And I think that they are such different subjects, just in the sense that antinatalism does come with it a lot. That, I mean, it's the same stuff. It's not what I'm saying, but I mean, it's a much more controversial subject. And I just think that it's maybe a little too much to ask the antinatalist movement at what has been, perhaps up until this point. It's been a little bit too much to ask of the antinatalist community to move away from jargon or their comfort zones with language and stuff at a time where it's sort of like all just started. You know what I mean? It's like we're only really 10 years into what this has been, what this has grown into online.
Right.
And I mean, 10 years is a long time, but it's developed really slowly. It's developed in these weird little factions. It's developed on all of these different social media platforms. And yes, antinatalism is a very old idea, but I mean, what has grown over the last 10 years? It's like, I think when we're when we're put into more professional situations, or we do interviews, or we talk to the public, I mean, it's hard not to champion the language. I mean, in some respects, I'm not talking about sprogs and breeders. Like I'm not talking about that kind of terminology, but there's a lot of the things that we say that are, we're sort of like ambassadors of a subculture. You know what I mean? And that does have its lingo, and some of that should be respoken, because it's interesting. It's something it's sort of, like a piece of internet ecology that's developed over these periods of time. And it's like, so I've enjoyed sharing that in the opportunities that I've had to speak with this subject about other people. And I also think that it's undervalued as a way of beginning the conversation with other types of people that aren't used to any of this, because I think it's always I feel like a lot of people that try to engage people with this subject that have no prior knowledge of it, they always sort of start in a very difficult place, or they start like sort of on the deep end. You know what I mean? It's like, I think sometimes framing sort of the way that this has existed and grown, using that as part of how you're narrativizing what this thing is important. It's just an important way to sort of begin the conversation. A lot of times, I think people find it very interesting that people have kind of come together online and found ways of talking about this and have these kinds of conversations. So it's like, it has to be some sort of, in my opinion, it has to be some sort of compromise by, again, sort of being like the voice, like an ambassador to sort of a small community of people, and using some of that terminology, I think is great. I think it is asking too much for people often to come up with their own ways of explaining it. Not everybody is great at doing that. And I just also think the short but fascinating history of it is important to relate to people. It's just another sort of tool in the narrative box. Yeah.
So yeah, if we use that analogy or metaphor of like a toolbox, and do you feel that the tool of, say, are you both familiar with like Christian apologetics? I remember Seven talked about this in the last podcast. So Christian apologetics is like Christians that are honing in on their defense of their theology. And they have conferences, they do these debates. It's like being educated in formal debate and how to engage with people. And I feel like that's kind of the next step, if it hasn't been done already, where we formalize our arguments going forward and presenting it in like a formal debate style. But I feel like this is, with all the tools in the toolbox, this is a tool that can be harnessed a little bit, or could be worked on a little bit more. And also like the professional side. And I don't think, people should stop doing the other things. I just think that this could be an added tool that should be fostered and also a little grown some more. Because what I've seen when I got involved, especially on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, the majority of the content was not geared towards professional style apologetics or debate, or and don't I know there are debaters out there, and I'm not putting down your work, but in a more formalized version, instead of the debate bro culture, which just shouting at each other. That's a different style of debate that I'm not talking about. But am I wrong? Like, what was your experience like, both of you, like when you first entered it into this movement, and how's it evolved, and what areas do you feel that are neglected that could be fostered and grown?
Amanda, do you want to go? Because I've not been in it long enough to really be able to answer that question in any, informed way.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer. I mean, I think if you've got an idea of how to do this thing in one way that's not being done enough, do it. I mean, I think.
But the thing is, I don't know, as an objective analysis of the communities, especially with 10 years of experience, what has been neglected, right? Like I have like maybe a couple of subscriptions. I'm not looking at everything. So from your perspective, what areas do you feel could be worked on and expanded on?
Well, I mean, we just started Antinatalism International. I almost don't know how to answer the question except for that. I mean, it's clearly gotten to a point where if we don't organize, I think it's going to de-evolve.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like it can't go anywhere else at this point. Like there's no, yes, new YouTubers can come and all this other stuff, but I think part of what ANI is developing sort of the feelers out into the world of what the future of antinatalism as a movement is going to look like. And yeah, so part of it is doing all of these different styles and approaches. And I hope there's very few styles and approaches that I would say don't do that. You know what I mean? I guess, but if I can just say honestly, and maybe this is coming from too personal a place, like I never really looked at this movement in terms of like what it's lacking in that kind of way, just because I always found it so fucking inspiring. You know what I mean? Right. And maybe that is because I was seeing the lack of it. I've never really thought of it in those kinds of terms before, but it's like the possibilities of all the different ways that you can do this thing just seem so obvious to me. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what I love about it so much, is that it's I say it all the time. It's like in this world where in art and in everything, the common criticism is it's been done before, it's been done to death, that people, it's all regurgitated, we're all regurgitated, and there's nothing original. It's like, well, antinatalism sort of is in a unique place in that, because regardless of the fact that it's such an old idea, it really is so underconsumed an idea. It is really so underdeveloped in the sense that it's so obvious that it can be in all these different formats and be done in all these different approaches, and it's so obvious the amount of art that can come from it, all the different conversations that need to happen, that can happen, and the fact that they can happen in these multitudes of different forms. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than that. I will do anything in my power to make all of that happen. You know what I mean? Yeah. If it doesn't, I think it's a little too much to ask for individuals to necessarily be great at every approach under the sun. But that's part of the thing, is that it's not necessarily about a reinvention of yourself as your sole contribution as one antinatalist activist. It's like, how can we inspire others? Yeah. To bring to it some of these new approaches.
And I noticed over the years, Amanda, and also just getting to know you, Lawrence, over the year, one of the things people think about antinatalism is that it's a downer topic, and I think, Amanda, you've seen this over the years where people kind of give up and kind of have this fatalistic or feudalistic kind of mentality where it's just futile to even do anything. But what I've seen from both of you is that this has inspired you, this has given you passion, and I was curious, like, is there anything you could say more about that, how this particular topic, philosophy, ethic, has affected you personally in your life, in terms of inspiration, passion, and just how it affected you in general?
Yeah, I go first. Yeah, I would say the biggest way that antinatalism has impacted my way of thinking generally is, well, maybe I'll start first with how sort of waking up to animal rights did. So, as I sort of said a bit in the podcast we just recorded, like before I woke up to any of this, I was very much just the sort of person that wanted to plan the track of my life and wasn't really concerned that much with what else was happening around. I was sort of very, it was tunnel vision, which perhaps a lot of people are like that. And then when I eventually woke up to animal rights, I realized that actually there are these really horrific things going on that are not even recognized as horrific. Like, obviously I was aware before that there are loads of horrific things going on, but everyone was aware they were going on and wanted them to end. But this was one thing that, you know, the person I was friends with down the street would actively encourage, and if you tried to argue against it, they'd call you stupid or something like that. And so this wasn't even something that was recognized as an injustice. But I think the reason that it's different from antinatalism, and it changed the way that it was different in the way it changed the way I thought about things, is because with animal rights, at least with domesticated animals, it is something that we are actively doing to others over a period of time, that we all need to stop doing. But it's not really happening to us. Whereas with antinatalism, and so basically with animal rights, that made me realize, okay, the things I do and that I have been doing have a serious impact on others and are the source of a lot of pain. And so I need to reflect on what I'm doing, and then I need to change accordingly how I'm behaving in my life. And I need to, you know, try and contribute to the efforts to sort of remove that sort of stuff from existence, and just so people don't do it anymore. But with antinatalism, it was kind of different, because it's like, it is something that's happened to me, and it's happened to everyone. And so when I sort of started looking into all this stuff, the big perception change that I had was that I kind of feel like, you know, existence is like, oh, this sounds like so wanky to put it like this, but I can't think of anything else to say. But basically, existence is like this storm, you know, and there's, you know, sometimes if you exist and you're in a storm, you get a bit of a thrill, you know, some good things can happen. But at the end of the day, there's so much risk, and everyone's going to end up getting hurt. And in this storm, we're all in the same boat. We're all in the boat together. And so we've got to kind of all pitch in and do what we can to at least make each other's existence somewhat more bearable and enjoyable. So that's the way that it really changed my sort of way that I view the world. It's very much now more, you know, as an individual that exists, and I share in existence with everyone else that exists. You know, I have my interests, but I need to also appreciate the fact that everyone else has theirs, and we've all got to try and chip in to try and alleviate the great ills that do exist while we're here, and just try and prevent others from, you know, getting stuck in the same position we're in. So I don't know if that was like a coherent train of thought, but that's at least how that's impacted the way I view the world and how I think.
Did you want to say something, Mark? Do you want me to attempt to answer?
No, I think that that addresses some of what I'm curious about, but I have another question after this. So please, Amanda, go ahead and go ahead.
Can you actually ask the question again? I'm sorry, just because
So my question was about how. So the when people get into antinatalism, one of their or when they're observing the antinatalist community or activism, one of their comments is that this is such a depressing downer philosophy. And some people have taken it that, you know, this whole thing is futile. Why do we even talk about it? Why do we even try? But for both of you, you've had a different reaction. It seems to have inspired you both and given you passion to talk about this. And so I was curious about the personal effects it's had on you in your life, and just in general, like how that.
Can I quickly just add a 20-second just addition to what I said to tie?
Go ahead, of course. Yeah. Yes.
So from what I was saying before, the way that it ties back to the actual question is that appreciation for the fact that everyone is in the same boat of existence, and I want to play my part chipping in, that was the inspiration of helping to set up Annie and do this sort of stuff, to at least help lay some foundation to do that. So yeah, that just to link it more directly back to the question asked.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my answer is some version of that as well. I do want to do my part, and I think I've never found this subject depressing. I really haven't. I find life depressing. I find the realities on planet Earth really depressing, but antinatalism and efilism are like solutions to that, or at least taking the responsibility of trying to find solutions for that. And that's hopeful, in my opinion. And there's this sort of selfish side of it that, yes, I find this extremely I find this extremely inspiring creatively. I think on some levels it did sort of put my life in order in some respects that it wasn't. I think I have derived quite a bit of meaning from being an antinatalist, which I'm very grateful for, which is sort of, is sort of a naughty thing to say in some circles, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think the reason why, I think one of the biggest reasons why people turn away from it, or maybe I've noticed time and time again what happens is that people come to this very enthusiastic initially. I think I froze there, but am I back? I'm okay, right?
Yeah. You're back, yeah.
Okay. They come to it extremely enthusiastically. I mean, time and time again, you'll see somebody put up a gazillion different videos and, just raring to go. And then all of a sudden it just sort of fizzles out. And, for a period of time, at least, people would sort of go from antinatalism to nihilism. Like, antinatalism was like the last stop on the train before you got to nihilism. And I think that's because, just sort of the antinatalism is kind of hard work. I mean, I think in a multitude of different ways. And I think it does require a certain, if you're at all serious about being an antinatalist activist, not necessarily just an antinatalist without anything else attached to it necessarily other than your own reproductive activities, it's sort of a responsibility. And I don't think people want that on a great many levels. And so I think once it starts smelling of that to a lot of people, and because it is in some respects taking the weight of the world, on your shoulders, and it does mean difficult conversations with people, and it does mean being a spokesperson for some very controversial ideas, and it does means all of these very uncomfortable things, even if you love it. I think that scares people off. And that's another reason why I think it's kind of important to welcome a lot of different types of approaches, because somewhat, but yes, so go on. Lawrence, you're going to say something, I think. Forgive me.
Well, no, I was just going to make the observation that this isn't just unique to antinatalism.
Yeah.
You were saying how you see a lot of people come in really passionate. They, go ballistic, doing loads of sort of different things, and then they just fade away. Exact same thing happens in animal rights. It's called the revolving door of activism. It happens all the time. To an extent, it happened to me. I was doing animal rights really passionately for 2 years, and it wasn't that I fizzled out because I became any less passionate. I just didn't really know what to do. And it may be the case with antinatalism as well. Now, not knowing what to do, that doesn't explain the fact that people take their content down and stuff like that. But it can explain why some people fade into the background, because they just see this massive task ahead of them. And when you put that much energy in that short amount of time, and it doesn't really go anywhere, because let's be honest, like with a topic like this, it's very hard for one individual to have, this such a big impact that they're going to see a return on their investment that quickly. It can demoralize someone and cause them to fade away, which to an extent happened to me with animal rights, and it happens to a lot of people. Like with me as an individual, the passion is still there. I just don't know where to direct it at the moment, and maybe I'll figure it out. And maybe it's the case with a lot of antinatalists. Maybe at one point they'll come back having figured out where they want to put it. But yeah, it's not unique to antinatalism. It happens everywhere.
No, but I think that, like, and this isn't, listen, yes, like plenty of people that are vegans one day, like, go get a cheeseburger the next, unfortunately. So there are huge ideological shifts that are like seemingly random. But I think it is weird that people sort of like going from antinatalism to moral nihilism, which is sort of just something that you do see, with some regularity. It's a little strange. I mean, it's a little bit of an extreme form. I think sort of losing. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with just being at different points in your life where the activism is not necessarily possible. I mean, it's like any sort of creative energy. Like, you just don't always have access to it. Like, I love to draw, but I there are times in my life where it's like, for some reason, it's blocked. And I kind of think our energies with everything is a little bit like that, unfortunately. It's not that you're not doing animal rights activism right now because you all of a sudden, eat a steak every night. It's just because the time of life that perhaps you're finding yourself in, and that's more than fair. But it's the crazy ideological shit. Like, why? Like, for my part, I'm sorry if we're getting off on a tangent, by the way, but when I first came to this community, I didn't make my first video for a year, because I wanted to think about it. I wanted to make sure, because I was a toy fucking reviewer before this. So I was like, how the hell am I going to make any kind of dent in any of this? Like, what place could I possibly have in it? And so the only way that I could have any kind of access to it was just sculpting the guy in the house that he lived in that I learned all this from. That was as much of an antinatalist activist as I could possibly be, and I wasn't even telling anybody about it at the time. And then slowly my ability to do this grew. So I forgot the point I was trying to make, but I mean, it's great.
Do you think this has helped your mental health?
Or antinatalism?
Yeah.
Do you want to go, Mark? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to butt in there. I would say it's like a love-hate relationship. It's the same with animal rights. It's like the awareness of everything that's going on is bittersweet. It's nice to have a better understanding of reality and what's actually going on, but at the same time, reality is shit. So it's not always good to have a better understanding of it, for at least psychologically. But yeah, I would say overall it's improved my mental health, I would say, because I have it's going back to the boat thing. You see everyone as just like it sounds so fucking wanky, but you see everyone as sort of like a fellow, crew member or whatever. It's like you can relate to people like that. It's like, even if someone really pisses you off, you can be like, okay, you've pissed me off and I'm annoyed at you at the moment, but I can appreciate that, you didn't choose this life. We're both, in this together, and we need to, even if we hate each other, let's at least try and help each other reach towards the lifeboat or something. I don't know. So I would say from that perspective, it has somewhat. It's made me have at least, I can be more sympathetic or empathetic with people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me too. I do think it's improved my mental health considerably. I think there's lots of other factors in my life that are more toxic to my mental health than antinatalism ever has been. There are parts of this that are hard. There's the big, there's the drama. The drama sucks, and but that's kind of par for the course of any internet community you're gonna enter into. I mean, I used to run, anime toy message boards before this, and the drama wasn't any fun there either. But so the fighting can get onerous sometimes. The shifts in friendships from time to time over things can be difficult. There's definitely just sort of being on the internet and being sort of at the mercy of people that can get a little bit difficult at times. There's definitely that side to it. That's to do more with the internet than the subject, although I don't think the subject necessarily helps in some cases, just in terms of how crazy it makes them. But it makes me less crazy, which I think is the good thing. I think it's just for me, it's given me a lot. It's given me sort of it's given me, I know this sounds bizarre, but it's given me sort of the intellectual and creative playground that I've always wanted to be in. And I think that's, having access to that has been great for my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
For me, it's helped because not just creating beings into existence, one, it helps me solidify my vegan ethic as well. Because one of the problems I had with vegan ethics was that we were somehow saving animals, but for me, it was always about sparing animals from coming into existence. And it's not just that, but when I think about the environmental movement, when I think about the vegan movement, when I think about the antinatalism movement, or any of these things, it opens my eyes to a more clarity of reality. And that sort of gives me as you mentioned, I think Wassel Zaf in The Last Messiah talked about it as a great psalm about the brotherhood of suffering between everything alive. And that's how I feel. I'm kind of humbled by this reality. It's quite dark, but the fact that, we're all in this shit together kind of gives me this connection to all life. And this drive to want to help where I can while I'm here. So that's sort of the benefit that I got out of it, and I think it's made me a more, in my opinion, more altruistic in my interactions with people and how I do my activism as well. And I'm curious for both of you, how has this affected you interpersonally with your friends and family? Because we didn't really talk about that, I don't think.
Can I just quickly add on to what you said real quick?
Yeah.
There is, I'm sorry to interrupt at all, but I just wanted to say I think what you just said is beautiful, and I agree completely. And I think it's not just antinatalism that's made me feel closer to people, to just sentience, just like we're speaking as like one sentient. You know what I mean? In a sense, like, it's made me feel closer to that sort of idea. But I don't think it's just antinatalism. Like, yeah, it's like once I realized that, then I did find the veganism, but then it also kind of solidified the atheism, and then it also sort of solidified the right to die. And then I think determinism also kind of plays like an important role in that, of like not just sort of the understanding that it allows you to approach humanity with at that point. Like you just have a much more, I can't think of the right word, like charitable is not the right word, but it's like you have a much just softer
compassion.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's a certain kind of compassion that you wouldn't have otherwise. You wouldn't have access to if all of those sort of building blocks of veganism, atheism, right to die, antinatalism, ethalism, like if those weren't stacked correctly, you wouldn't have access to that kind of compassion, I think. And I definitely feel that.
Did you want to go straight into talking about interpersonal stuff?
No, please go right ahead, Lawrence.
Well, for me, it hasn't really, well, at least, I mean, animal rights is a different story, but with antinatalism, I mean, both of them, antinatalism to a further degree, but both of them are somewhat socially isolating. And because I'd gone through the animal rights stuff first, I was sort of prepared and understood somewhat how antinatalism could have the same impact. So I kind of knew some ways to behave that would, stop certain bridges from being burnt and stuff like that. But generally, interpersonally, most people that I know, I don't think know anything about me and being antinatalist or antinatalism generally. My friends that do know, either are also anti-natalist, or the ones that aren't, they just kind of see it as like that's Lawrence's thing, you know. But I'm not really going to consider anything, because, you know, it's a bit like you know how vegans get all the time, like, oh, that's just, you know, he just does his vegan thing or whatever. So I mean, maybe that is just somewhat of a defense mechanism that people have. I'm sure I have it on many things, and used to have it on these things. But yeah, with friends, it just kind of gets, you know, pushed to the side. With family, I haven't spoken really with family about it directly, just because I did with animal rights and it didn't go the best. It's gotten better over time. But yeah, with antinatalism, I sort of knew, like, like, you know, they've already had their kids, so it's like there may not be any sort of benefits to stepping onto that path, given that it could backfire. But just because I have quite a loud voice and we've been having Annie meetings weekly, they have like overheard and asked me about it and stuff, and it's gone all right. It hasn't been confrontational, but it's been sort of like, oh yeah, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And it's like, well, I'm setting up an organization around it, so yeah, I fucking thought about that. But yeah, so interpersonally, it hasn't been like a major train wreck, but it hasn't been a major success as well. But I think the fact that I went through animal rights is the thing that made it so it wasn't a train wreck. Otherwise, it would have been fucking messy if I hadn't had that experience prior.
How about you, Amanda?
So I mean, I think, like, how can I, like, so I didn't really talk about it with that many people up until I was like talking, you know, in the outside world of the internet, like up until I was starting to apply to graduate programs. So that was like in 2000 so I came into this community 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, and then in like 2013, 2012-ish, I was like applying to grad programs. So pretty soon after, two years or so afterwards, I started to really like push it as a subject into people's faces. And I mean, most of the friends that I have made in the outside world over the last 6 years have been introduced to me, to them as an antinatalist or as an ethicist. And hey, check out her insane movie, or she was on this insane show. So it's like not something that I have any ability to hide at this point. There's that. But I don't know. It's like, you know, it's kind of some people are going to love you for it. Some people are going to hate you for it. And I don't mean to sound like, I know, you know, I don't mean to, that's not a sob story of any kind, but it's like, I've sort of had that experience my entire life with a lot of things. So it's like, I was never a normal little girl. You know, I was genderqueer from the time I was a tiny little kid, and some people love you for that, and some people hate you for that. And I also had very severe learning disabilities growing up, and some people are understanding about that, and some people just hate you for it. And I was always very overweight, and some people are nice about that, and some people are very cruel about that. So I was always very used already to being sort of at odds with a lot of people, and I've grown very accustomed to not being everybody's favorite person. And so, I mean, it's just a fact. And so it doesn't frighten me that people may reject me because of my antinatalism or ethicalism. Like, I just have gone into that as that's sort of par for the course. And the fact of the matter is, I've made some excellent friends through it, you know, and I did do my thesis on the subject of antinatalism and ethicalism, and the movie was made in graduate school, so I did have the opportunity for, you know, hundreds of people to come into my studio and talk about these things with me, and some people were disgusted and some people were fascinated and elated, and I received opportunities because of those things. And you know, some people I've convinced, and some people I've maybe even had a couple of instances where it's all backfired. You know, I mean, it's so I think it's kind of run the gamut, and I think that's in part because of I've never really been, I don't come from a background of argumentation. You know what I mean? And any ability that I've gathered to talk about these things in any kind of coherent way, I'm still kind of working on that. But it's like I wasn't always my ability to explain these things has maybe failed in some situations, but it's also just I think it's just sort of par for the course. Like some people are going to have very divergent reactions to these things, and I think some people hate it initially, and then they go away for a while and they think about it and they start to understand more. I mean, there's all different. There's a wide variety, of what's to be expected. I don't think my mother loves that I'm so obsessed with this, but she came to the premiere of The Etholist and loved it, and so I've been very lucky. I've been very supportive. My best friend, ExA, is now a full-blown antinatalist. Wrote, one of the world's first antinatalist plays, Beyond Venus, which is shown in theaters, and he's received some kind of amazing response to that. So some people are going to love you for it. Some people are going to hate you for it, and that's just sort of the way it is. And you just if you're interested at all in being active in this subject, you kind of have to learn to roll with those punches. And people not liking you is really not the end of the world. You know what I mean? And there's going to be the people that love you just as hard as the people that dislike you, and you just got to kind of keep those people closer.
Growing up with that background, that you must have felt like a black sheep in a lot of these groups. Do you feel less of a black sheep within this community?
I don't know. I mean, on one hand, I especially after this, I mean, this year especially is a time to ask me this question, because like, I don't think I've ever been so loved in this community. I don't think I've ever been so hated. So it's, I don't know. I've never had as much support as I have right now, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, let me put it this way:
at the same time,
growing up, and compared to now, do you feel more connected?
Connected to what?
To a philosophy and your worldview, and also other people. Like, I feel like possibly, and I might be wrong about this, that you found others that validate your perception of reality, where you kind of empathize with how they think and you think. So you kind of have that bond, that kind of connection of having that same worldview. Where prior, if you're around, for example, if all your friends are meat eaters and you're the only vegan, there's a sense of isolation there. But now that you have, and I'm using this as an analogy to antinatalism, but now that you have so many people that that are antinatalists, would you feel more, less isolated and less of a black sheep when you have so much people seeing the same thing as you? You're muted.
That might be a hindrance. No, I think so. I don't know. I don't know why this is a difficult question, but it is actually a little hard to answer. It's also hard to answer because I've been inside since March, so I do feel very isolated.
Yeah.
So it's a bit hard to separate those two things, but yeah, I mean, I will. I'm sorry, I want to let Lawrence talk too, but like, in addition to the antinatalism and all these ideas and the art and everything, there's just also the vlogging thing, and I think vlogging allowed me to be honest in public in a way that the real public never allowed me to be. And that absolutely changed my life. And that sort of laid a foundation, where I really did not hold back talking about some really sensitive things in my life at that particular point in the Forever Wolf Films channel. And then in addition, after I had done that part of the internal work, and found people through that too, like, I was so much stronger to do the antinatalism, and so yeah, I think all of that together has allowed me to feel connected and to want to be connected, and it's good. Like I think it's all kind of come together. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm living a very different life internally than I was as a kid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
It does, yeah. Well. How about you, Lawrence? Did you have anything you want to comment on with that question?
No, not really. I would agree that you like one of the most important things with the human condition is finding community, and something like antinatalism or animal rights is a very strong way of, well, it's a very strong foundation for forming community, because the members of it are very isolated, and so you can make yourself quite distinct. But apart from that,
you've definitely, like, you have more experience with the animal rights world. You have that connection and that community. How do you feel with the connection and community this year within the antinatalism world, Lawrence?
Well, I'm still very new to it, so I feel, I don't know, the connection I feel is very disjointed and odd, because the parts of the community that I feel connected to are the people I see like once or twice a week, which are all the founders of Annie. But I, to be honest, am still very much a noob when it comes to interacting with the wider community. I still don't know the sort of the key players in the community. I mean, maybe this is a good thing, but I don't really understand the politics of it all. I have less historical context, as someone like Amanda would have, being in the community for like 10 years. So and also one of the funny things, or at least I found it funny, is that like I would, we would be in meetings when we were setting up Annie, and the others would be talking about someone and be like, "Oh yeah, I love that. I wish I could meet them," or something like that. And I just have no idea what who this person was. I'd never have met them before, etc., etc. Like, for one meeting, we had Glynos join, and he's obviously made all the cartoons and work that he's done.
Yeah.
Literally had no idea who he was. So it was like I had no context. So I mean, it's been nice to meet people, but I haven't had the same sort of like context that a lot of people in the community will have. Now, whether that hinders my connection or not, I'm not sure, but I would say I'm connected with a small part of the community, at least, quite strongly. But the wider community, I would still say I need to get to know better.
Yeah, you touched on something which goes into my next question that I wanted to ask you, and it's a two-part. You talked about burnout and politics. So how would someone who enters in the community or just advocating for this, what advice or what kind of observations have you both gone through that that could help someone without burning out? And also, how does someone, if drama or say politics is inevitable, can't avoid it, how does someone navigate that? So burnout and politics, what advice or thoughts do you have on that?
Shall I go first? So the burnout, I would say, with the burnout, I would just say, what's helped me is, don't do stuff that relies too much on other people. Now, I know that might be ironic coming from me, because I've just helped set up an organization with five other people, and we're all intimately relying on each other. But I think that given the experience I've had prior, I'm better at managing it now. But I would say to someone who's new, don't dive head in and have to rely on loads of other people to get stuff done, because then the politics will get mixed in and it will hinder your ability to do stuff, and you'll be putting all this effort in because of the politics and maybe because of other stuff. There isn't going to be much return, and you're just going to get burnt out. So I would say, which is why one of the reasons with my future work with animal rights, I very much more want to focus on just doing stuff by myself, whether that be going to universities and giving lectures like I did before, which I'm currently writing my own animal rights talk that I want to give, which hopefully I'll ask both of you to look over when it's finished, if you'd be willing. But yeah, it's stuff like that that I want to focus on more, because I can pick it up and do it whenever I want. When I want to do it, I don't have to rely on other people. All I have to do is book in the talks myself and make the contacts. And there's no politics involved because there's not really anyone else involved. So I would say that don't rely too heavily on other people. Try and find a niche that you are good at and you enjoy and that contributes to the cause, and try to make that the cornerstone of your activism. Obviously you can interact with others and do whatever you want, but I'm just saying, if you don't have the foundations of your activism based in your own control, I think it can lead very easily to burnout. And then with the politics, I mean, I don't think politics is avoidable. Again, I think one way that you can mitigate against getting caught up in it is being able to carve out your own niche. But if you're going to interact with other people, you're going to get involved in, well, you might not get involved in politics, but it will definitely impact you. I haven't figured out a good way to stay out of it, apart from just staying out of the community. I haven't got any good suggestions for the politics.
Yeah, I think the only way to avoid politics is to not have opinions, and that sucks. Like, I didn't come to this community not to have opinions. Yeah, I think that's why I agree. I think it's unavoidable. The burnout. I mean, two pieces of advice: always allow yourself time off. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really okay. You know, doesn't matter. It can be your greatest passion in life. Too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. You know, and so give yourself breaks. And the other thing is, don't go public with any of this until you're ready. Like, weigh all the options. Don't let anybody put pressure on you. Take the time that you need to take, even if it's years, to figure out what you want to say, what you want your contribution to be. You know, always keep in mind that you are putting yourself out there on the internet, and that does come with risks, and that there's going to be trolls, and that there's going to be all kinds of things that you are not in control of. Yeah, and I, you know, just do whatever you can do to make sure that your contribution is sustainable, that, you know, you've thought about what you want to say and what the possible backlash of those things is going to be before you put it out there on the internet. Because if it is something that you are passionate about and you want to, you know, continue to contribute to, you know, you just, that's the way to make it a sustainable part of your life, I think, is to really just give yourself the time that you need to make sure ahead of time. So again, like, I didn't make my first antinatalist video for a full year. I sat in my room and made a sculpture, and that was fine. You know, and I didn't go public with any of it until I was ready, and I did it entirely at my own pace. And then when you're ready, if you do want to contribute, if you do want to make like your first video and, you know, introduce yourself to the community, there's always my contest every year. You know, there's always now moving forward, there's always going to be ANI. There's always going to be some way to get involved. You know, and so I think that that's a wonderful thing. You know, I think that's, you know, from now on, for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a very different narrative for the new antinatalist, because there's going to be new opportunities, and it's just going to be sort of a different playing field. But before you enter that field, just, you know, do some self-preparation. You know, you should always do that, I think, before entering something serious and something on the internet. So, yeah.
Can I add quickly one other tip?
Yeah.
So this is less politics and more burnout. When you sort of come to something like animal rights or antinatalism, it's natural, and I think everyone has had it, to feel isolated from their own friends and family, because essentially your understanding of reality has been uprooted, and the people closest to you aren't seeing it in the same way. They haven't had this, change in understanding. And so a natural thing to do, or at least what I did, and I know a lot of people do it, is you go hell for leather trying to convince your friends and family. And in the process, a lot of people burn bridges. And so one tip that I would give people is, with friends and family specifically, let them come to you. Like, it may be annoying and you may really just want to go for it and try and convince them, but it rarely goes as well as you think it's going to go. And so just allow them to come to you in time, let them develop curiosity and come to you, and then have the conversation with them. And by the time they come to you, you'll have likely had conversations with loads of strangers anyway, and so you'll be better at doing it. But that's one thing I would do, is don't dive straight into friends and family that you already have relationships with, because you'll fuck it all up.
That, and I'm sorry I hope you don't mind me adding on to, but that is one of the most important pieces of advice anybody could give anybody in this community. So I absolutely 100% agree. I can't tell you the number of horror stories that I've heard of people like immediately running to mommy and daddy or their grandparents, and then the grandparents or the parents telling the kid to go kill themselves. Just horror stories. And it happens all the time. And it seems like, I think antinatalists get it into their heads where it's like, all I've got to do is say the logical arguments, then the logic will do the thing, and it will all happen so fast. And it's like, no, you're dealing with something that has a slow rate of understanding. Often it takes a lot of time, and it's not, these aren't magic words, what's often called local antinatalism can seem like the easiest answer, because global antinatalism seems like impossible. But it's really important not to build bridges. And I just want to say to people that, like, you were put here against your consent, you were imposed upon to live this life, but like, at least for a period of time, make this a part of your life that's just for you. You know what I mean? You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need anybody's, you don't necessarily need these people in your life to agree with you about this. It's something that you think, and that's okay. And, and if you come to a point where you're ready to help them understand, or, that's different, but make it something that's for you, at least for the time being, until you reach that next stage of it. If you do.
I'd like to, if you don't have anything to say on this, it's okay. But I know that you both said the politics, the internal drama is unavoidable, and I accept that. But if it's unavoidable and someone enters in and they find themselves in those situations, is there any thoughts or comments that you could have for someone like that to navigate it?
I've got one tip, because I've stumbled over this hurdle, and I think it's maybe a good bit of, it's a bit of advice that I could have used when I first started. And I mean, maybe it seems obvious, but if you're newly entering a community that will always have pre-existing drama and politics, don't necessarily believe someone when they tell you something about someone else. Because I cannot, like, there is endless times I've been told something about someone else in the community, and it's either been a lie, or it's been an inadvertent mischaracterization of who they are, or what they've said, or what they've done. There are some people who have done things that should be rightly condemned in many cases. Often it's something you've just got to put the feelers out and try and make up your mind for yourself. But there are so many people. I know less about the antinatalist community just because of my lack of engagement with it. But in the animal rights community, there are a lot of people who have been smeared that didn't deserve it. They've been mischaracterized, etc., etc. So if you go into a community that will have pre-existing drama, don't just believe everything that the first person you meet says about other people, because often they will be completely well-intentioned and nice people. It's just, it's easy to smear them on the internet. And, you know, so don't build your models of how other people are by what you get told by third parties. Interact with the people yourself if you can. If you want, you don't have to interact with these people, but if you do interact with them, make your own mind up about them. That's what I would say.
Thank you. How about you, Amanda?
I would agree with all that. I don't know. I mean, you know, there is some wisdom to just sort of taking a step back, and you know, I don't. I don't know. I'm actually not entirely sure how to answer this question, to be honest. I mean, I didn't. I didn't really have any drama for like a long time, except for a couple of instances. Yeah, I don't know. I think what Lauren said is really good advice. I mean, try to stay away from cliques. Try to stay away from, yeah, you know, do your own research on individuals. Don't you know, it's very easy to jump onto a bandwagon. But, you know, I think also, I guess the piece of advice that I would give is that, you know, at least speaking from the antinatalist community, I mean, you have to also just not personalize some of this stuff as much as I think people do. People take some of this stuff so personally, you know, when there's sort of battles and stuff like that. And I mean, and some of it is very personal at times, so I get that. But try to not take it all so personally. And I also think that, yeah, just try to keep some of it at arm's length as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Lawrence.
I've got another thing. Is it's sort of related to the family friends thing, but it's very easy to get passionate about these things and put 100% of yourself into them. Now, sometimes that can work out. There are people that go full-time activist, and you know, it's the best thing they've ever done, etc., etc. But I wouldn't, as soon as you discover this new world, don't replace your entire old world with it, because if you jump right in and it fucks up, you'll have burnt a lot of, like, I think you get what I mean. Like, be wary and conserve the parts of the old world that are worth conserving, because like doing activism in, like, it doesn't matter the subject, just any form of activism can be very tolling, well, on your body as well, but on your mind. So you need a part of the old world to go back to rest up and remove yourself, which is why, you know, as horrible as it is to, you know, be around someone that may, you know, for example, with animal rights, maybe eating animals or something like this, it's good to at least try and maintain relationships with people that you already knew that still do those things, because you need to remove yourself from the animal rights or antinatalism environment from time to time and just bring yourself back down to earth, because it's easy to get into this echo chamber and for it to take you way off somewhere else. And then you feel like you've got no real connection with the vast majority of reality and other people, and that can be really damaging as well. Because I've found, definitely within the past year, I've found that I've had the urge to reconnect with things that I did or people I knew before I did like animal rights and antinatalism. And one of those things is rock climbing. So I used to be big into rock climbing. I kind of stopped when I went to university, but I never picked it up again because I just went straight into animal rights, straight into then antinatalism more recently. But I've started appreciating the value of those sort of like old world sort of stuff, and so I've picked up rock climbing again, and I love it because I can just switch off from everything. So that's another thing that I would recommend people do.
Yeah, hobbies are important ways to take. I did remember sort of part of what I meant to say earlier. Sorry, I'll try to keep this quick, but I think it's also important to just keep in mind that, you know, part of it is okay that people fight in these communities to some extent. Like, we are talking about ethics, and we are talking about very heated things, and you know, like, antinatalism does sort of have this rather rich, you know, response video culture kind of thing to it, and you know, there's some wisdom, if you're not into that, to kind of stay away from it. But it's a very instructive thing to just appreciate, to engage with, at least from as a spectator sport. And I mean, I think part of what we should be doing is sort of, you know, is the whole battlefield of ideas kind of concept, and like some of that really is okay. You know, even if it does get a little heated and politicky at some points, like it's part of what we're supposed to be doing, and it's really not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it's super healthy.
Yeah,
intellectually. And so, what advice would you have if I was? I'm going to use me as an example, just to avoid associations of the past. But in the future, let's say that I want to go and fight Lawrence. Intellectually, not physically. Or if I want to argue against Amanda, like what would be a way of arguing that would be charitable and honest, where we wouldn't feel attacked by one another?
Shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the best things to do, and I'm not saying that I do this all the time, because often I'm very sloppy, but one of the best things to do is, before you even start engaging with someone, try and steelman their position as much as possible. And if you need help, and when I say steelmanning, it's the opposite of straw manning. So be the most charitable in your interpretation of what they're saying as possible, and everything that you can grant them, grant it, because the stronger you make their position and you can still knock it down, the stronger your rebuttal will be, rather than just making some straw man and knocking that down. It's very weak. But that is more on a sort of like argumentation level. On a level of actually being able to engage with someone intellectually but maintain a relationship with them, I would say be intellectually humble, be intellectually curious, always go into a conversation understanding that, well, in good faith, and understanding that that person may disagree with you, but it doesn't mean they hate you or anything like that, or they think you're an evil person. And it doesn't mean they come from an evil place. You may, like, a very easy example is animal rights. Now, if you were to be as uncharitable as possible, you could say these people hate animals. All they want to do is cause animals suffering all day long. That isn't the case. Most people are good people. They just they haven't really tackled these issues before. So come at it from a charitable place. I would recommend, there's two resources I would recommend. One is, and as far as I can tell, it's just an online academy. And the other one is a book. So the first one is the Heterodox Academy. I think they're a completely online academy. And essentially what they try to do is bring people with different ideas together. And they try to break down echo chambers, groupthink, all that sort of stuff.
That's by Jonathan Haidt, right?
Sorry?
That was founded by Jonathan Haidt, is that right?
Yeah, it could be. He is very much on that sort of wavelength. I wasn't aware if he started it or not, but yeah, he moves in those circles. So I'd recommend, like, even just going on their Instagram account or something, Heterodox Academy. There's a lot of tips they have on there. They host a lot of events, etc.
And they give like advice on how to interact with people, or
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
I've seen that. Yeah.
And the other one, that I would recommend people check out, which I haven't actually read it yet, but I've watched some interviews with them talking about it, is there's a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations by Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. That would be a really good resource. I haven't read it fully, but I've read whatever that word is, excerpts.
Excerpts, yeah.
Yeah, and I've watched interviews with them talking about it, and that's a really good resource. They, if I can steal from what they say in one of their interviews, they say that if you don't take anything else away from the book, it is that you have to, if you want to maintain relationships with people, you have to allow friends to be wrong. Now, your friend may actually be right and you may be wrong, but from your perspective, if you disagree with them, presumably you probably think their position is wrong and yours is right. Otherwise, you would hold their position. So from your perspective, you have to let friends be wrong, because if you want all your friends to be right, you know, no one's ever going to be the exact same as you, and no one's ever going to think the exact same as you. And so if you want everyone to be right and you want to agree with your friends on everything, you're going to have a very small friendship group. So I would recommend those, Heterodox Academy and How to Have Impossible Conversations.
Well, those are all good resources. Yeah, I think just always trying to be as honest about the other person's argument as possible. You know, not devolving into straw man shit and ad hominem attacks and personal stuff. Keep the goddamn personal stuff out of it. You know, I think that's huge. But I also think that you have to psychologically prepare yourself that if you're arguing on the internet, not everybody knows all these rules or is going to be as sensitive as you maybe need them to be. And so you have to sort of steel yourself enough, make yourself steel enough, I think, like psychologically, to where some of this is not going to have the damaging effect if you're not getting what you need out of individuals that you're having some of these battles with. And I think also part of it is having boundaries and setting limits. Like if people are crossing a certain line with you, even ahead of time, don't engage with those individuals and cut it off. You know, if it's going a place that you can't necessarily take or you don't want it to go. I mean, if you know, you don't always have to, you know, stay in the battle, you know, so to speak. I mean, you can basically just, you know, it can come to a point where it's like, this is not you know, if somebody is just doing nothing but coming at you with, you know, more ad hominem attacks and it's all this personal stuff, it's like you really don't owe anybody anything, you know. And I think some people forget that, you know, in some of these encounters, that they sort of have to stay in it and they have to win, and it's not necessarily what the goal of it should be, and it's not necessarily what makes the most sense in all of these encounters.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to pick your brains about. I feel like I've covered quite a bit for a spur of the moment interview, considering we just had a 2-hour conversation before this.
Yeah, I just want to say my brain is a little bit soggy spaghetti noodles at this point. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on the channel and doing an encore of the podcast episode. I really think you guys gave some really good information and some insight. So I really appreciate that. Thank you both.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.